Are you in, or do you possibly know of someone who is in a very complex, dysfunctional family situation? One where possibly what's happening inside the family is very different from what's being portrayed outside the family in public. Listen to Sarah Westbrook. She has a fascinating story chronicling her former life, and she's now a licensed therapist helping others through complex, dysfunctional families. She is a person who has experienced, is overcoming complex PTSD. Hi there, and thank you for joining us on the Overcomers Overcoming podcast. We feature those who are in the process of overcoming or have overcome any type of life encounter, life obstacle that at the time seemed to be almost insurmountable. With this podcast, we have three objectives in mind. Our first objective is we want you to know with a confident resolve you are not alone. We want to work with you. We want you to know there are others who are working with you, who want to help you through whatever you are encountering, and together we will get through whatever you're experiencing.
Our second objective is there are multiple options for any life encounter you are facing. We want to help you develop a resolve that there are various options and solutions to any life dilemma.
Our third objective is to help you with critical thinking skills. If you're encountering something that was possibly a decision you made sometime in the past, and if you had the opportunity for a life redo, you would make a different decision. We want to help you with those critical thinking skills that can help you make an informed decision and not encounter what you're going through at the moment. We are the Cooper Culture, a veteran-owned business. We work with business personnel and families to develop and sustain connected relationship cultures within their families and organizations. That type organization is one where people feel wanted, appreciated, and genuinely a part of that organization. I'm with my wife and business partner, Marty, who is helping me facilitate this podcast. Today we feature Sarah Westbrook, who with a lot of confidence explains her upbringing, the family in which she was raised. She discusses a complex family dysfunction which resulted in her complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And she's very outspoken, very confident now about explaining her situation and how she's dealing with it. She's now, through her life experience, a licensed therapist helping others overcome what may be a very traumatic background. It is a fascinating story which will continue into another episode of how she's overcome her past. Marty, what are some takeaways our listeners can gain from Sarah?
Ron, when you listen to her story, I think it's hard for me to understand how parents or people can be this way. But there's a quote, hurt people hurt people. And Sarah has faced that. But to her credit, like you said, at a age, she said, this is enough. I'm not going to let this dominate my life. And so she went to a counselor, got help, and now she helps, through a podcast, helps women or people that have gone through a childhood trauma to not live in the past, in the hurt, but move on to the future.
I want to encourage our listeners, if you are experiencing or you are aware of anyone who's experiencing anything like this, let's reach out and let's work together to help people overcome their past to become the very best God created us to be. Let's listen and learn together. Sarah, it is great to have you. For our listeners, I'm just going to explain very briefly. You have gone through a very complex background, history. You are self-described having come from a dysfunctional family. You've been through various parts of life. You have experienced what you call complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Sarah, there's a lot of relational challenges you have been through with no attempt to marginalize any of that. I, I, I just want to tell you, we are so glad to have you with us. That there is a possibility, Sarah, we have a listener, maybe more than one listener, who is experiencing what you have experienced, and learning from your past can help the person overcome what they're going through. Sarah, it's great to have you with us.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Sarah, can you start wherever you want? You had a storied past and complex PTSD. Can you give us somewhat of a top level summary so our listeners can have an appreciation of what you've been through?
Yes, absolutely. So I was born and raised in a very fundamental religious community. And I like to start with saying, my parents were doing the best job that they knew how to do. There was a lot of pressure to get married and have children right away, and neither of them had taken the time or really have the resources to put in. Whoops, let me end that really quickly. My phone is ringing. Neither of my parents really had the resources available to them to work through their own traumas. I was their oldest child. They got pregnant with me 3 months after they got married. And I think that inadvertently, they took out a lot of their traumatic past on me, because complex PTSD is a diagnosis that you get with chronic, usually chronic childhood abuse and neglect. So during my young years, I was sexually abused, I was physically abused. In my teenage years, there was a lot of emotional abuse. And my parents held me hostage in my own home when they found out that I was sexually active at the age of 16, which was against the rules of the religion that we were a part of. And so yeah, there's a lot there. Both of my parents have been diagnosed with so my father is diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. And then my mother has been diagnosed with covert narcissistic personality disorder, which showed up a lot in her very quiet need to be perfect. So she was very much a perfectionist in a very toxic manner, and all of her children had to also meet that standard of perfection for her to feel valued and accepted in society. So we very much grew up on the outside looking like an amazing, healthy family, that we were functioning, that all of us kids were just amazing and well behaved. And then what was happening behind closed doors was very shocking as I started talking about it. So many people that know our family, and after my book came out, and the community people that still know us, read that book, have come back and said, we would have had no idea that this is what was going on behind closed doors for you.
So. Did everything you're just describing happen within your biological family, your mom, dad, and that somewhat of a close, confined family?
Yeah. The trauma. So I would say that while I'm not a member of that religious community anymore, the community is meant to be an uplifting, spiritual, connective community. They go about it, in my opinion, in interesting ways that aren't always going to give you the outcome that you're wanting. And so really the focus is not so much on my Mormon upbringing as much as my parents utilizing teachings from the Mormon religion to harm me. So and that's one of the confusions with my book. A lot of people are getting into it expecting to read a book that's going to bash Mormonism, and that's just not the case. It's to illustrate how my parents used many of those fundamental teachings as an excuse or as a battering ram to abuse, control, and manipulate many aspects of my life.
So what I'm reading into what you're saying, Sarah, is maybe your dad I don't know that he was the dominant one, but he was a narcissist, and the let's just call it the characteristics of narcissism was the operative factor in coming up in your family. I suppose you could say that that's all you knew.
It is all I knew. I didn't know any different. I thought that all of my friends had dads that were always right and very smart. When you read my book, I talk about how my dad was the smartest teacher at the elementary school that he taught, that he was the best administrator. In my home growing up, if I was not the best, I was not loved. So things like I was a dancer and on competitive cheer squads. If I was not the best on the squad, if I was not the smartest girl in the room, then I would lose love and support from my parents. I also played the flute. I was in marching band. I sat first chair with my flute from the time I started band in 5th grade all the way up until I graduated from college. Because if I was not the best, then I was scum beneath his feet. And so both he and my mom's narcissism extended into, not only do we know everything, not only are we the smartest people in the room, not only is our family better than everybody else's, and let us point out all the ways in which we are the smartest or the best. That had to extend to the children of, if our children do not keep up this facade that our family is the best, well, then we're going to cut those children out of our life, or we're going to make their life very miserable. So I grew up in a very competitive home, but an unhealthy competitive home, because some competitiveness is very healthy. It's a great motivator. But for me, it was, if I'm not the best, I won't be loved anymore. If I'm not the best, then I will hear my dad say things about me that I hear him say about other family members or other people in our community. It was very much, let me cut other people down so that we could feel better than everybody else. So I hope that gives you a nice little glimpse of how I was raised.
Sarah, I want to ask you, said your mom was a different type of narcissist. So are there degrees, but explain your mom's narcissism?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have to be careful with the term narcissistic personality disorder. It's kind of trendy right now in community. So you're going to see in a lot of social media places people throwing around, oh, I'm married to a narcissist because they are selfish in this way, or they're not very good at communicating. And that's not narcissism at all. You have to see that continued pattern. So with my mom, she was very quiet and reserved. A lot of her narcissism came out in that need to be perfect. So our family had to be the most reverent. We had to sit quiet. We had to have everything done just so, very much in almost an obsessive compulsive disordered way. But also, if there were any failings in our family, it was not my mom's fault. So in my Mormon upbringing, it's a very patriarchal society. So the man is the head of the household. They make the decisions. They speak for God. And so for my mom, it was very much, I will never speak out against your father, even when he is abusing you. I'm going to cover up the fact that he sexually abused you. I'm going to keep that all secret because, one, I don't want other people outside to know that I could have married a man that would engage in this, but also number two, well, he's speaking for God. So anything bad in our family, that's not my fault. It's his fault. And even now, if I approach my mom with, Mom, where's your responsibility in the things that occurred against me when I was in the home? Her response is, well, you just need to forgive and forget. Let's just move on. Now, a lot of people wouldn't look at that as narcissistic because it's very subtle. So you would have to see this continuing pattern of the bad things in my mom's life are never her fault. Her opinions are stated as fact always. If you don't go along with her belief system, if you live or make choices outside of her belief system, she will cut you out of her life. A great example is my mom worked for a medical provider and suspected that the doctor was sleeping with one of the assistants in that building. And so she took it upon herself with absolutely no evidence to state as a fact to the doctor's wife, your husband is cheating on you. And then when he came back going, whoa, that's not what's going on. For her, it was, well, I suspect it, therefore it is fact. And she got fired, but also that marriage of the doctor and wife was very, very troubled. And even without the evidence there, my mom will continue to say things like, that's not my fault. He shouldn't have been acting that way. It's not my problem that they're having marital problems. I probably brought to light something that would have eventually come up, so on and so forth. And as it turns out, there was no marital affair, and there's no remorse for having put a family through what she put them through, because her morals and values are, I speak up no matter the harm it causes the people around me, even though I have no evidence to determine otherwise. So it's that subtleness, but it's still very much there.
A lot of thoughts come to mind. What I'm picturing as you're describing this is your dad is very dominant, and that was part of the Mormon makeup. You were made to feel that you're just not good enough because you always needed to excel, but you always came up short. I don't want to suppose that, but was that largely a part of your childhood? You're just not good enough?
I would say, well, number one, yes, absolutely. And to this day, part of the complex PTSD is when anything goes wrong in my life, my initial thought is I'm unloved because I'm not good enough. And that's something that I have to slow myself down and walk myself back and say, life's circumstances are not interconnected with my personal value. But that is still that initial response of I have to perform better in order to not lose love from the people around me. I would say, as far as my dad being dominant, he was dominant, or he was allowed to be dominant in the relationship when the risk of something failing was high. Otherwise, my mom was very subtly dominant in the sense that she used sex as a bargaining tool to get my dad to do certain things within their relationship. So between the two of both of my parents, there was a lot of sexual inappropriateness and sexual manipulation. So early in their relationship, my mother was sexually violated by my father. We probably needed to put a content warning. We might want to go back and content warning on this. But then my mom learned very, very quickly that if she wanted to get something, all she had to do was dangle the sex thing in front of my dad. And so their relationship, it was very difficult for me to know who's in charge today, whose rules are we following today? Are we following dad's rules? Or are we following mom's rules? And I would actually say, growing up, my mom was the heavy-handed disciplinarian for us kids, and my dad was the playmate until we hit our teen years, which is, developmentally, teens push against their parents and have a different opinion. And my dad did not handle that well at all. And subsequently, what my mom would do is she would buddy up with us as teens and kind of get us to be, oh, dad is evil, dad is bad. And she would play the victim of, well, maybe I should divorce him. Oh, no, I can't divorce him because in Mormonism, that's not allowed, so on and so forth. So it was a very mixed dynamic. And I would say one of the dynamics that led to the complex PTSD diagnosis is that my childhood was very unpredictable. Sometimes I had my needs met, other times I did not. And I was always afraid of, am I doing something wrong? If I am I going to get in trouble? Even when I was doing everything right, I would still get into substantial trouble. My parents have my dad mostly has blamed me since I was 18 months old. He claims that I have been trying to sabotage and break up my parents' marriage. I was 18 months old. Obviously, that's not I have no idea what's going on at 18 months, but he will say today that basically from the time I was an infant, my primary goal in life was to break up my parents so I could have my mom to myself, which is very fascinating, very dysfunctional, but that is his claim.
The picture I'm forming as you're describing is you had a family within your house who was very dysfunctional, very manipulative. That's what I'm
Very.
processing as you're describing this. There was, I'm going to guess, a lot of gaslighting
Oh, yeah.
going on that, oh, well, Sarah, something's wrong with you that you could even think that way. But then when you'd get in church, you would present the air. Your dad, mom and dad would present the air that, oh, you're the perfect family. And maybe at the time you knew mentally, oh, if you just knew what was happening inside our house. And so you went through many years of what I'm processing as mental turmoil that, oh my gosh, it's just almost as if you hated being in the house. Maybe, Sarah, was that kind of what you went through?
Um, so let me just kind of expand on your picture real quick, and then I'll answer your question. So I would say that in private, I was never good enough. But when we were in public, neither of my parents had any problem bragging about, well, look at Sarah, she's got great grades. She's the #1 flautist. Her competitive cheer team is between first and third in the state, so on and so forth. So in private, I was never enough. In public, I was placed on a pedestal as a bragging right. And I think that Sarah's on a pedestal in public becomes very important, because when my parents find out that I'm sexually active, so if you read my book, you're going to see that shift of Sarah was the greatest thing known to man. Look at all of these bragging rights we have for her. Oh my goodness, she's had sex. She's a disgrace. Now we're going to lock her up and hide her away so that the world cannot see her or see her flaws. So I don't remember your question now.
No,
I
it
totally
was
gaslit you into a different.
no, that Sarah, you're describing things that, okay. So what I'm picturing as you're describing this, that out in the church, outside your house, you were put on a pedestal, so to speak, but that could be the narcissist, manipulative fashion that, oh, if you hear anything from my children about things are not going well in our family, just look at how proud we are of Sarah, so forth and so on. But I picture that as the narcissistic, manipulative aspect. That's a part of what a narcissist is, I believe. And that's if I'm saying anything that's inaccurate, certainly correct me, Sarah.
No, I would feel that is accurate. And I think that when we're looking at, does this person I love actually have narcissism, you've got to look at the patterns of behavior over many, many years, because frankly, all of us have some narcissistic tendencies at one point in our life or other. If you were to read the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Health Disorders, you're going to read that and you're going to go, oh my gosh, I'm a narcissist too. This is terrible. I'm an LP. I'm a licensed professional counselor in a couple of states, and I've got lots of clients that come in and they're like, I read it and this is what I have. And I have to go, okay, well, slow down. We've got to look at those tendencies. But yes, absolutely. I grew up in that environment. And then the second piece of that would be when I found my voice. When I tried to find my voice as a teenager, I learned very quickly, just shut up and drive forward. As an adult, as I began the healing process and I found my voice and I began to inquire or get curious or go back to my parents and say, hey, what was going on? Or your behavior at this time was very harmful to me. What I get is a complete and utter lack of accountability. And that is one of your keys to narcissism is there an apology? And for me, there is not. It's a lot more of that gaslighting of, oh, it didn't happen that way, or you're just imagining that, or you've always been an exaggerator. You are such a liar. That never happened in our family. And then the other piece of that is once my book came out, my dad made it a point to go to certain extended family members and to my siblings to say, Sarah's book is full of lies. None of it is true. You shouldn't read it. And I had to laugh because number one, that's classic narcissism. But also he definitely drove book sales up because all of these people were like, oh, well, we want to see what lies Sarah is telling. But the sad piece of that is I don't have contact with any of my siblings anymore because I've exposed my father. And even though my sisters will tell you, oh yeah, this is what happened, my brother absolutely will not. My brother will fall in line with my father. And when I look at that, why would my siblings do that? My theory is, and I can only give you a theory, but my theory is they don't want to be treated by my parents the way my parents have treated me for healing and learning to speak up and speak out against narcissistic abuse, or even utilizing those fundamental religious beliefs as an excuse for why that abuse, why that, holding me hostage in my own home. For them, it's, well, we did this because this is, what God would have wanted us. I had a personal revelation. This is therefore what God wanted me to do. And I followed that. So any harm to you is God's fault. And that's very much that narcissistic tendency is, role reversal and shifting the blame onto other things rather than saying, hey, when you pull your 16-year-old daughter out of high school and then you make her mother stalk her for months on end to make sure she does not have any contact with her boyfriend, that's emotionally and mentally abusive. That's not an appropriate response to a 16-year-old acting like a 16-year-old does. And for him, because he had a personal revelation, because it was the only way he could save me from my horrible boyfriend, it was an okay thing to do, and it came from God. So any issues I have with it, I need to take those issues up with God. And that's very narcissistic, but that's also in a nutshell, that's what my childhood was.
Wow.
You answered the one question I was going to have. If you had siblings, were your siblings treated this way?
So I got the brunt of it as the oldest child. So I'm the oldest of 4. The next one below me is my brother. And boys can do no wrong in my dad's eyes. Any mistakes, so we have to, I'll share this story. So I had sex at 16 with my 18-year-old boyfriend. My brother at the age of 21, 21, had sex with a 14-year-old. I got taken out of school and held hostage in my own home. My brother was bailed out of jail, and the 14-year-old was blamed for all of that by both my father and my mother, saying, well, she seduced him. He had absolutely no control over it. And my brother walks free. He should be in jail. But by all reason of the law, he should be in jail, and he is not, because the 14-year-old was not willing. I don't know all those circumstances, but they did not pursue charges. And I think it was because the 14-year-old's mother liked my brother and allowed them to have some of that sexual contact, and they were afraid of getting in trouble as well. But from my parents' perspective, my brother could do no wrong, and it was the 14-year-old's fault that they had sex when he was an adult and she was only 14. My next sister was very tomboyish. And so for her, it was, well, she's just got mental problems. So she was neglected, but in a very different way than me. She was not the best at anything. And she tried very hard, but she never fit the bill. So she was never enough. And she struggles with deep-seated anxiety issues now. And then my youngest sister, definitely received very similar neglect. She was sexually abused by our next door neighbor, and my parents did nothing. They didn't do anything to make sure that she was protected from the adult neighbor that was molesting her. It was just, don't go to his house anymore. And that's all they did. So were all of my siblings abused or neglected? Yes, but in very different ways. I think the other thing is I have a very outspoken personality. I have absolutely no issues with confrontation. That's one of the things that I'm very proud of in myself. I have no problem saying it like it is and standing my ground and advocating for those who can't speak for themselves. That's my personality. Whereas my younger two sisters are a lot quieter. My youngest is a happy-go-lucky. She doesn't like confrontation. It makes her very anxious. And then my middle sister, the one that received probably the most neglect of the four of us, she just wants to, live in peace, leave me alone, let me do my own thing, type of relationship. So we've all four of us have struggled with severe mental illness issues, specifically my sisters regarding sexual and mental health. I'm the only one that has probably had access to the resources needed to really work through that because of my husband's military service. I've always had amazing insurance, and therefore me seeking treatment was more possible than for my sisters because I had access to care, whereas they have not had the same benefit of access to mental health services. So the mental health system in the United States is completely broken. It's very unfortunate. Those who need it the most are not getting what they need because access to resources and cost of care is just too overwhelmingly high.
You came out of it. Was it your husband that helped you or got you to the point where you could heal?
My husband has always been the man that he, over and over, he says, I choose you, I'll take you, with the struggles, with your strengths, and I deeply appreciate that. I had a wake-up call. I am not a cheater. I'm not the type of person who feels that lying to my husband or purposefully engaging in infidelity is an appropriate thing. And in 2004, we ended up living just down the street from the boyfriend that I'd had sex with at 16. And I had no idea that there were even the feelings still there for him because he and I had never had closure. My parents found out and we never saw each other again. And so he ended up with military. He joined the military. We joined the military. Never thought I'd ever see him again. And he ends up being my neighbor in El Paso, Texas. And he and I had a marital affair. And that was a wake-up call for me of what on earth am I doing? I'm in a very happy marriage. I have a very supportive husband. We were in the middle of getting ready to adopt our second child. If you had asked me the day before, is there any chance that you would cheat on your husband? I'd have laughed at you right in your face and been like, heck no, we are very happy. And so when that occurred, that was the wake-up call of I need counseling. I need help. I have no idea how I went from, this amazing wife and mother that, again, I'm going to be the most amazing wife. I'm going to be the most amazing mother so I don't lose love and respect. And I went into counseling, and that counselor, his name was Jim Fields. I don't know if he is still alive. He was in his mid to late 60s when I first started seeing him 20 years ago. But he changed my life. He gently challenged me on my need to always be perfect and the best. He challenged me on my need to be the smartest person in the room. And he especially helped me recognize that my tendency to exaggerate and lie to keep up the facade that I was the best and the smartest in all things was actually getting in the way of my second son receiving specialized medical care that he needed. And so I'm very grateful for my husband, Mason, because he has been my rock in the I will hold you up while you struggle through. But I would say that my healing came from counselors that were willing to call me out on my shit, and my willingness to address the issues in my life so that I could get better. So I would say yes, Mason has helped, but that my healing is attributed to having the support system in place and then having counselors that were willing to really call me out. Jim is also the reason I pursued a degree in counseling afterwards, because once he helped me, it took me about 3 years. So I would have started seeing Jim at 20, I would have been 23 when I started seeing Jim. And then by the time I was 26, 27, I had really turned my life around and had become a very different person. So it took 3 years. It was not an overnight switch. And then off and on since then, I have to go in for tune-ups, even as a counselor, even though I now have the knowledge to help people through this. It doesn't matter. When it's in my own life, I am blinded by, drowning. Therefore, I have to go and get that outside non-biased perspective to help me get back on track. And so here I am now 43 years old and occasionally go in and either consult with colleagues or go see my own counselor in order to do those tune-ups, because my complex PTSD does not define me. It's a label that helps me understand why I behaved in the way I behaved and how I could connect the dots from point A to point B without blaming anybody for my struggles. It gave me the power to say, this is what's going on. That was then, this is now. What can I do for myself now to get better? That was the benefit of the label, but it doesn't define who I am. And in order for me to continue to live in a way that I'm proud of, where I am living up to my own morals and standards, I have to go in and get help on a regular basis. And I think that that's where a lot of people struggle, is they go into counseling hoping for a quick fix. And that's just not the way that counseling is designed. You go in, you work through some hard things, you go out on your own, and then when life starts to beat you down and old habits and tendencies start to crop up again, you reach out for help. And over the years, I don't go in nearly as much now as I used to, but when life is really kicking my butt, I will absolutely reach out to educated people who are smarter than me and who can look at my challenges through a different lens than I can and help me see the things that I cannot, because my trauma brain is getting in the way.
I want to make sure I'm processing everything you're saying correctly, Sarah. Jim, your husband, if I'm understanding correct.
Mason is my husband. Jim was the counselor, but that's okay.
I'm sorry.
He won't get offended. It's fine. He'd
Thank
make
you.
a great Jim. Mason would make an excellent Jim.
Mason was by accepting you was huge. And then Mason suggested, if I'm correlating this correctly, you contact your counselor, Jim, who was bold enough to say, this is what you need to correct. And through a period of 3 years or so of the counseling, that was kind of your turnaround. And am I processing that correctly, Sarah?
So yes and no. I would say that my husband's unconditional, so in the counseling world, we call it unconditional positive regard. He just accepted me for who I was. And when I said, this is what I'm working on, he was my biggest cheerleader. He was my rock. When I actually went in to see Jim, my husband was deployed to Iraq. He wasn't anywhere there. I did it on my own. And not because my husband wouldn't have, hey, let's go see a counselor, but I cheated on my husband in 2004, I want to say in May, and Father's Day, so 6 weeks later, my husband deployed to Iraq. And I couldn't, like I said, if you read my book, you get all the details of that time. I did not leave anything out. So the book is Trauma Bonded, a true story of navigating. Oh goodness, I don't even remember. It's up here. I don't remember the title of my own book. Let's see. A true story of navigating attachments forged in complex PTSD. I thought that my husband should divorce me. Everything in my religious upbringing said, if your spouse cheats on you, it's the only reason to get divorced. We were very young. So my opinion was, go find somebody who can be better for you than I am. Because in my upbringing, when you make a mistake, you abandon the person who made a mistake. And so I fully expected my husband to leave, and he wouldn't. And I was mad at him for it. And so a lot of the drive that got me into counseling was, I need to fix this so I can be the person Mason wants, because I'm always afraid I'm going to lose him, because I'm not ever going to be enough for this man. And so where Mason had that impact and healing was, he accepted me for who I was right then in that moment, no matter what. He didn't leave. Even when I pushed him away and was like, you should go find, there's so many other people out here who would be better for you than me. He said, no, I choose you. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. Sarah, oh my gosh. I feel like there's so much more we need to cover, and I want to take this time to thank you and your husband, Mason, for serving our country in uniform. I'm 22 years Air Force, so I can identify with your husband. I know what it is to be deployed. Marty and I have been separated for as much as 18 months, and so we know what that is. So thank you and Mason for serving our country. Sarah, I want to ask you something even while we're recording here. Would you consider another episode to where you can tell us exactly what it was? And I feel like we're at the turning point that you recognize that things are at a point where you've got to make a change. You have to do whatever you have to do to become a better person. You are a licensed therapist. You have been through, life, but you're almost uniquely qualified to help others because you've been there. But Sarah, would you consider another episode, at least one more, where you can take our listeners from the point of, I'm at some sort of desperation, I need help, and help that person maybe get out of the house to seek the help they need? Would you consider another episode?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be an honor and a privilege. My goal is, my life mission right now is to help bring productive skills so that people can take what they're learning in counseling and apply it in their life. And I want to make that basically free. I want people to have access to the information so they can heal. So it would be an absolute honor to, have your listeners hopefully find some answers and some peace in what I have to say.
No, that's all good. Let me close out by asking you, are you ostracized by your family, your mom and dad, or how would you describe your relationship with your mom and dad and other siblings?
So I am not ostracized by them. I had to cut them out of my life. So again, another instance you'll read about in the book is my dad bloodied she would have been 4 or 5 at the time. He bloodied her lip because she ate a chip in his living room. And he, to this day, will not take accountability. He says, oh, I was sick. Oh, it was her fault. Oh, you shouldn't have been visiting us when we were sick, so on and so forth. That was a huge wake-up call for me. I was willing to take all kinds of abuse growing up. And because in my Mormon upbringing, family was supposed to be the most important thing, there was no way I was going to cut them out of my life, because that would have a negative impact in my belief system. That would have a negative impact on the eternal progression of myself and my children. And as soon as my father's abuse crossed over to my children, specifically my girls, I had no more tolerance for it. And so I tried to reconcile with my parents. We went to family counseling for a little while. And when it became very apparent that they were not willing to put in the work or take accountability for the harm they were causing in my children's lives, I told them no more contact. And there's been no more contact from me. Now, my mom has reached out to me a couple of times, and it always turns into a disaster. I will say, I need, in order for us to talk, you need to be accountable for your role in this. And I get the same gaslighting every time of, you need to forgive your father. He wasn't feeling well, so on and so forth. And so, yeah, I don't have contact with them anymore. I think one of the challenges for them is they keep demanding that I forgive. And forgiveness for me is a symptom of healing. I forgave him a long time ago. I can talk about what happened now without having a strong negative emotional experience, without being triggered. I have forgiven him, but I don't trust him worth shit. And I would never feel comfortable with him being around my small children unsupervised. And so because of that, we have no contact. So I forgave him, but that does not mean I need to open myself up for his continual mistreatment of my family. And again, specifically my girls, because boys can do no wrong. And God blessed me with a whole lot of boys. So it took a long time to get there because I've got a lot of, so my husband and I right now, we have 9 children in our home. At the time all of this happened, we had 7. We're foster and adoptive parents. So we had 7. So at the time that my father did that and I cut him out, I had 7 children, 5 boys, 2 girls. He did great with my boys, not my girls.
Sarah, that may be another topic to discuss or include in the follow-on episode. It may be necessary to separate from the toxic environment that is part of the past, no matter how difficult that is to do that. Sarah, on behalf of our listeners, thank you for being so open, transparent, and living the experience that you've had, reaching out to help others. We'll make your book, Trauma Bonded, known to our listeners. And would it be safe to assume it's available through Amazon and anywhere books are sold?
Yep, it is available anywhere books are sold. So absolutely. And you can get it paperback or hardback. There's also the audiobook, and I read the audiobook myself. So I put a lot of heart and soul into that and a lot of emotion into the audiobook. So, and I believe the audiobook is exclusive to Audible, but don't quote me on that. But yes, the book is available anywhere books are sold.
Sarah, thank you so much for sharing. We look forward to continuing this dialogue, your story, in another episode. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
We appreciate having the opportunity to share our and our guests' life's experiences with you.
The Cooper culture advances organizations to achieve and sustain high retention rates, connected communication, and trust through personality insights and principled leadership. You can contact us at our website, thecooperculture.com, and you can contact us directly at ron@thecooperculture.com or Marty, M-A-R-T-Y, at thecooperculture.com. We work with you to help assess aspects of your culture to advance the environment and people to their best performance. We do that through our staff of certified personal performance coaches, leadership trainers, keynote speakers, and DISC personality behavior experts. You can book a speaking engagement directly through our website by contacting us at ron@thecooperculture.com. We look forward to sharing our life experiences with you, some of which are profound, some of which are pretty funny. Some of those life experiences are ones we'll never do that again because we've been through stuff. We truly look forward to working with you, speaking with you, helping advance you in any way that we can.